I hope you've had a good week. And I hope that you're having a good morning and that you have a blessed day and a blessed time for being here and studying with us this morning. We do have some visitors. We're glad to have you, but it appears that most of you were here last week. And if you were here last week, can you remember what we talked about? The answer is no. I understand that. But let me remind you, we were at the end of James chapter 3, starting in verse 13, just 2 or 3 verses there. And James is talking, to Christians. And he says, if any is wise and understanding, or if any of you Christian claims to have wisdom, let him, remember, show it by the life that you live. And so we talked about wisdom a little bit. Remember when I said wisdom is that space between black and white? Life would be so easy if everything were black or white, but so much of my life is lived in between trying to figure things out. And therefore wisdom is asking God to help you see people and situations and opportunities and problems the way He wants us to see them so that we can see in this space between black and white. And then James comes along and he says, but if you've got wisdom either that comes from this world or comes from the devil, or you've got wisdom that comes from heaven or from God. And all the time last week we talked about the wisdom that comes from God. And he says, it'll show up in the way you live. And he said, the overriding thing that describes the wisdom from heaven is that we are peace-loving and peace-making people. You remember that now? And so we're full of mercy. And so we are people who are reasonable, and we are impartial, and we are sincere because we're peace-loving and peace-making people. But James also says there's a wisdom that's from this world that's so prevalent in people's lives, and it could be even prevalent in a Christian's life. Shouldn't be, but there's a wisdom from this world. And he said instead of being peace-loving and peacemaking, the wisdom from this world causes all kinds of confusion and disorder and chaos and then every kind of evil, because the wisdom of this world is summed up in 2 words: jealousy or envy and selfish ambition. Think about that for a moment. Think of all the problems that occur because of jealousy or selfishness. Think about that. And so you think about maybe things that are not too far removed from you. Maybe like how with siblings, sometimes jealousy and sometimes selfishness can cause all kinds of confusion and disorder and disruption and other evil practices. And maybe you think of an example at work, how someone was jealous, how someone was selfish, and all the disorder that happened at your place of work. Well, you think about some examples as I take you back to some what I call Bible classics. Now, there's nothing new. Everybody in this audience understands these stories, so I don't have to rehearse them in any detail. But I want you to see the damage. I want you to see what the wisdom of this world that's jealous and that's selfish produces over and over again, even to this very moment. And if you can't think of examples, you will be able to think of them as we go through this. In fact, you can just turn the pages of yesterday's news, or this last week's news, or the last couple of weeks, and you find all kinds of stories that originate with jealousy and selfishness, and they end up in all kinds of chaos, and they end up in maybe even something like murder. It's everywhere. But I'll take you back to Genesis chapter 13 while you're thinking about real life stories. And everybody remembers that Abraham is obedient to God by his faith. Abraham's left this land of his father. He's traveling, got his nephew Lot with him. And God is keeping His promise. Early on, God is blessing him so that he becomes extraordinarily rich. And his flocks and herds have so increased, and Lot is getting rich also, and his flocks and herds are increasing. And out here in the fields, there's just not enough grass for all of it. And so the herdsmen of Abraham and the herdsmen of Lot are doing what? Remember? Arguing. They're arguing. When there starts being jealousy and selfishness and whose is what and whose is mine and what's mine, and arguing comes. But Abraham's a giant of a man. He's the mature man in this story. Because he goes to Lot and he says, Lot, we ought not to have this disruption. We ought not to have this problem. We're family. We're brothers. Here's the classic. He says, you just look out and take what you want. I'll take what's left over. You know what Lot does? He takes the selfish road. You take whatever you want, I'll take what's left over. That's the mature look. But Lot says, well, wow, the fertile plain of Jordan, I'll take that. May I tell you this morning that every time you and I make a decision out of selfishness, every single time, it'll end up bad. It'll not work. Every single time we make a decision out of selfishness, the results aren't good. He goes down to the fertile plains, makes his home there. The wickedness is greater than what he expected. In the end, he loses his wealth. Flocks and herds are gone. His home is gone. His wife he loses. He barely escapes with his own life and the life of his children. It's what happens when something is born out of jealousy and selfishness. Well, Abraham will go ahead to have sons. One son, Isaac. But then he'll have Isaac having some sons, Esau and Jacob. Remember that? Jacob's one we remember, and he had the 12 sons. But I'll tell you, Jacob got mixed up in his faith along the way because some of the wisdom of this world entered into Jacob's life, and he was partial. And some of those sons were young. 2 of them were just really young, born in his old age. And he was so partial toward them. Every time a parent shows partiality, what happens in the brothers and the sisters? Every single time. There's disorder, there's chaos, there's jealousy, there's selfishness. Do you know what the 10 older brothers do? Now, Joseph doesn't help things because Joseph, when he's young, is braggadocious. He makes it even worse. They stuff him down a well to kill him. They're going to kill him. They would have killed him. Except for one brother says, I see a better way here. Let's sell him and let's make some money. And so they sell him to a traveling band of Midianites to haul him off to Egypt. All of that because I'm jealous and I'm selfish. But it gets worse. I don't know of anyone that spent any time in the Old Testament that hasn't fallen in love with one character, the man named David. I don't know of anyone. No, David wasn't perfect. But the stories of his life abound in Scripture, and we love every single story. And David was king of Israel. He had several sons and several daughters. But he had one son. He had one son named Absalom. And I'm telling you, he really was the tall, dark, and handsome one. There wasn't a blemish about him. And he's a prince. He's a prince in Israel. Now, I kind of have this feeling that I wish my father were a king. And I kind of wish that I was a prince of some country. Because I kind of feel like he wouldn't have to work very hard. And I kind of feel like he'd have a lot of money. And I kind of feel like that would be a pretty easy life. Don't you think? I just wouldn't mind being a prince. And I'd be content with one of my brothers being king as long as I could be a prince and treated like a prince. I think. But not Absalom. Not Absalom. Absalom has within his heart embedded a selfish ambition and even a jealousy toward his own father. He wants to become king. Prince is not good enough. He wants to become king. And he becomes a world-class politician. I've decided that politics really haven't changed. It's the same thing today, same thing back then. You know what Absalom does? He goes out by the city gate. And when the people have been to see the king and get some decision made, and they come back out, he'll say, how'd that work for you? Did you get what you wanted? And if they say, no, it wasn't settled to our liking, he says, if I were king, I would have done it this way and this way. You'd have gotten rich and you'd have gotten a wonderful judgment and all this. Isn't that politics? Isn't that what happens? Every politician says, oh, look at how they're doing up there. If I were there, I would make you this and this and this and this. And he built a coalition like that. Absalom built a coalition against his father. And he'll do the unthinkable. He'll force his father to have to leave his palace and literally run for his life. He's trying to kill his father. And he will publicly humiliate his father before all of Israel. Because he was jealous and he was selfish. And it ends always in disorder and chaos and every kind of evil, is what James says. The story doesn't end well for those who are selfish. Have I told you that? You hear that a moment ago? Every single time you and I choose the selfish route, it'll never end up right. Because he's just riding along on his mule. He's got all this massive amount of hair. I'm going to grow mine back someday. He's got all this massive amount of hair. And he goes over under a low-hanging branch. And his hair gets tied up in all that thicket. And that mule just keeps going. He's just hanging there. And the general of the army of David finds out about it. Comes up and kills him. I can just tell you, this selfishness thing and this jealousy thing never brings about peacefulness and order and love. It's just the opposite. I moved to the New Testament. You know the stories. You know in Acts chapter 5, a husband and wife, I think they're jealous. Because in chapter 4, Barnabas, he's had a piece of land, he sold it, he gave it to the apostles so the apostles could use all the money, and he was getting all his praise. And they think, we'd like to get on this deal. We'd like to be praised. So they sell some land. Only the selfishness is embedded inside them, and they say, okay, here's what we'll do. Let's keep this for ourselves, and let's just go to the apostles and act like this was everything. Let's just lie to them. Does it end well? Does it end well? I mean, they both drop dead on the spot when they're confronted by Peter. Isn't that something? Well, one more. It's not a classic. It's not a classic. In fact, you may have not ever heard of it. And at the end of the Old Testament, there are 3 small books. 1 John, 2 John, 3 John. We spend a lot of time in 1 John. But the last 2, they're just little tiny short one-chapter deals. And in 3 John, John talks about a person. He writes down his name. He writes down his name. I'm sure that fellow wishes that his name were not written there. I wouldn't want my name written for this reason in the Cordell Beacon. But it would be one thing to have it written for one issue of the Cordell Beacon. It would be a far different thing to have it written in Scripture. It'll be for everybody to read until this world passes away. His name is Diotrephes. Diotrephes. You know what John writes about him? Here's the description. Here's what I wouldn't want written about me. Diotrephes loves to be first. He loves to be first. He is so self-centered. He is so selfish. He loves to be first. And he tells what Diotrephes did. He said, when I came and the people came with me to see you, he would not accept us. He wouldn't welcome us. He wouldn't have anything to do with us. You know why? John's an apostle. John is somebody special. But Diotrephes what? Loved what? To be first. I don't want to take a back seat to John. I'm jealous of this guy. The wisdom of this world, James says, is jealousy wrapped up with selfish ambition that leads to disorder and disharmony. Now, have you thought of some examples? And every kind of evil. Have you looked not far away from where you live and you see those things playing out? And what am I supposed to do? Because while I'm trying to have this wisdom from God, the wisdom of this world keeps creeping back into my life. And the only thing I know to do is every single day ask God, put your wisdom inside of me. Let me see life the way you see life, and let me see this person the way you see this person. Let me see this situation the way you see this situation. And let me bear fruit from the wisdom of heaven and not from the wisdom of the devil. Because the devil wants you to be jealous. And the devil really wants you to be selfish. And he wants your jealousy and your selfishness to cause all kinds of disharmony and disorder. He loves disorder. You ever seen it in a congregation? Jealousy and selfishness, even in a congregation. He loves that disorder. And then it leads to all kinds of evil things. And James says, if we're Christians, let's try to have the wisdom from God. Are you willing to ask for it this week, every day? I need to ask for it every single day. So you can think about those thoughts. Thank you for listening. Let's stand and sing our final song.